Nathan's prophecy to David is coming to pass. He told David that the sword would never depart from his house. He is first bereaved of his son Amnon, and now, in organising a revolt, Absalom sets the stage for more bloodshed. Absalom takes his time in usurping his father. He plays the long game, cultivates a public image, takes advantage of grievances, and identifies key locations and players. It is a very impressive display of cunning and patience. Verse 1 describes Absalom putting together a royal retinue for himself. By going around in a chariot with 50 men running in front, he was signalling his intentions towards the throne. He was obviously trying to put the thought in people's minds, making the idea of him as king seem natural. In 1 Kings 1, when David is about to die, his next in line son, Adonijah, does exactly the same thing. He then spent 4 years winning the hearts and minds of all the tribes who came to Jerusalem for justice. He pointed out administrative flaws in his father's reign, bewailing in verse 3 the fact that despite the claimant being clearly in the right, the king had not appointed a judge to give him that justice. If only Absalom were appointed judge, then he'd set things straight for everybody. His earnest and caring image was augmented by a warm humility, the everyman touch, as he would stop them doing obeisance and kiss them instead. Going to Hebron was a clever move too. It put distance between him and David, but it had strong associations with David's rule, as that is where he was crowned and reigned for 7 years. Perhaps also there was grievance there to take advantage of, as David had shifted the capital to Jerusalem. Finally, Absalom acquires Bathsheba's grandfather, the revered Ahithophel. Perhaps he nursed a grudge against David for his dealings with his granddaughter. David wisely flees, leaving his concubines behind, perhaps hoping he would return home. He takes with him his mercenary troops, drawn from Crete and the Philistines, the Kerethites, Pelethites, and Gittites, who are obviously very loyal to him. David tells his priests Zadok and Abiathar to return the ark to Jerusalem. This is partly out of a resignation to the will of God, but also so that they may spy on Absalom. Zadok and Abiathar are both loyal to David now, but when the question of his successor is on the table, Zadok will support Solomon and Abiathar will support Adonijah. Thus the priesthood will become Zadokite. David is obviously very worried about the presence of Ahithophel with Absalom and prays that God will thwart his counsel. His prayer is answered in the appearance of Hushai, who is dispatched to join the spy ring in Jerusalem. Then David meets Ziba, who bears a great bounty of supplies for David. Thus he appears in loyal support. He reports that Mephibosheth was not so loyal and foresaw his own succession. David takes his word for it, but in chapter 19, Mephibosheth will give his side of the story. It may be that Ziba was another cunning opportunist, always able to spot prizes in the rumbling chaos of other people's misfortunes. David's next encounter is with the wrath of Shimei, who in verse 8 declares that all that has happened is God's judgment on David for all the blood of the house of Saul. Scholars have been puzzled by this accusation. It could refer to Abner in chapter 3 or Ishbosheth in chapter 4, neither of whom were actually David's fault. Or Saul and Jonathan's fate could be laid at David's feet, seeing as he replaced them. But what is more important is David's reaction. Once again, the bloodthirstiness of the sons of Zeruiah has to be restrained. But David's reason is striking and so typical of the depth of his thinking and how his inner life revolved around the Lord. He is completely resigned to God's judgment. What if God has rejected David? This then could be a prophet of that curse. He leaves his life and honour in God's hands. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, Hushai is attempting to ingratiate himself with Absalom. He is not rejected, so that is a partial success, but Absalom turns to one who is like an oracle of God, Ahithophel. Perhaps concerned that there is not enough resolve and enmity between the two factions, Ahithophel suggests Absalom seals the deal of his claiming the throne by sleeping with his father's concubines in public. Thus the final part of Nathan's prophecy is fulfilled.